Hi, CS260. I'm Professor Lee Jensen, and today we're going to be talking about Simon React Part 1, where you take your Simon CSS and HTML and move it into the React framework using the React components and also the React router. The first thing we want to do is come here and check out our instruction, head off into the instruction and navigate to the information about how to actually set up this deliverable. Coming down here, we're on React Part 1, Simon. And you can see all the information that we need in order to get going. So from this, we're going to see there's going to be two phases to actually getting React working. The first phase is to do what I just said, which is to get your HTML and your CSS into a React component and also set up your React routing. So let's see what our steps are to make this to work. The first thing that we want to do is we want to go over and clone the Simon CSS repository. So I'm going to go here to my command console and I'm going to run the command that actually brings down the Simon CSS version repository. And I'm just putting this in some little temporary directory here. These ones don't have to be kept around. You don't have to commit back to them. It's just so that you can experiment and play with them. So I'm bringing it in and I'm going to rename it when it comes down to be Simon React Phase 1, because that's what I'm going to actually convert it to. So I'm going to pull that down and I'm going to change into that directory, Simon React Phase 1. And look that I've got this actually going here. I can open this up inside Visual Studio Code and I can use the live server extension to make sure that it's actually working right now. So if I open up the index.html, go live with that, I should be able to come in and see that I've got Simon working. Everything's cool. And when I'm done, it's going to actually look very much like this. It just won't be going to different HTML pages. It will be using the React routing to actually make that work. Okay, so what's the next step? So now we actually want to install Vite into this project and turn it into an NPM package so that we can bring in other code from the NPM packaging service in the cloud. So I'm going to go ahead and first run npm init to make my project into an NPM package. And then I'm going to do npm install, and I'm going to install Vite. I want to use the latest version. And I want to install this as a dev dependency with the -d option so that it's not using it when I'm actually building my production results, but just using it while I'm actually bundling up my software and using the tool chain. So go ahead and run that. And I'm going to head back over to my code and I see that I've got a package JSON file and I've also got my node module, so all my downloaded code is coming in here. If you're astute here, you'd notice that I've now got 193 things that I need to commit. And the reason for that is because I've got my node modules coming in here, and my getignore file, which is right here, doesn't exclude that. I never want to check in all those third-party code bases because I can always just go get the code again by just running npm install. So I don't want to check those in, and now I'm back down to 3. The only 3 things that I've done is the getignore change that I just made, plus the package information, which makes myself into an npm package. So if I look at that, you can see that it named my project. I can rename it to whatever I want. My description is pretty boring there, but my main file is going to be, none of this really matters. The important thing here is that I've got my scripts right. So I'm going to go over and I'm going to copy in what I really want those scripts to be, because this, just echoing out that I don't have any tests isn't very useful. So I'm going to get rid of that and replace it with what I actually want it to be, which is that when I run the dev script command, that it runs Vite, which will start up my HTTP server and actually bundle up all my code and convert over my JSX into JavaScript and actually host it within the browser. So that's good. This one here, the build one, will do the same thing. It just won't start up the HTTP server. It will just put all the results into a directory, which then you can deploy, and we'll use that with our deployment script. There's also this preview one. It's similar to the build, but it also loads up the HTTP server and just reads the file out of that static directory. Repository, don't care about that. We'll get rid of that. Keywords, everything else looks good. Bugs, that's new. We'll get rid of that and that. I do have my dev dependency though, which is Vite right there. So I'm looking pretty good. The next thing I want to do is reorganize my code here. So I need to come over and create a new directory, and we're going to call it the public directory. This is just part of how Vite is set up to work, where it expects certain directories to be, and one of those is a public directory. Another one that it expects to have is a source directory, where all your source is. So public is just going to be like your static files, your images, your sound files, whatever. And then your source directory is where you're going to actually put your React source code in there. So in my public directory, I just want to take my image file, my placeholder one, and put it into there. I also want to take my icon right here, my fave icon, and drag that into there. So now I've got all my static kind of public resources in there. Then in my source directory, I need to create, I want to put my app CSS, which is, yeah, right here. It's main right now. And I'm going to rename that to be app CSS. And that's going to be just my high level styles that is going to be used on every one of my views within it. So I'm just going to keep that there as the high level styles. And you can see I've got things like the body, the header, the main, and then some navigation stuff. And then also like my media queries, so if they resize the page. And that's all top level. All my other specific ones for my views are going to have their own CSS files. So then the next thing I want to do is I want to create directories in the source directory for all of my different views within that. So that's my login page, my about page, my scores page, and my plays page. Rather than trying to do this in Visual Studio Code, I'm just going to come over here to command line, change into the source directory, and then I'm going to make a directory for about, plays, scores, and login. Come back over here, and I can see I've got all those directories in here. And then I can go and grab my code. So here's my about code for my existing stuff, and I'm just going to drag it up here into my about things. Remember, one of the benefits of actually using React is that it kind of forces you, and Vite, it kind of forces you to set up your component structure in a way that's appropriate and not just having like one big directory full of all sorts of stuff. So I'm going to do the same thing here with my play. HTML and CSS, drag that into my play directory. I'm going to take my scores and I'm going to drag that into my scores directory. And that just leaves the index.html, which actually is not an index.html. It's actually my login. So I'm going to rename that. We're going to turn that into login.html. And I'm going to drag that up into my login directory. So now I'm already reworking my structure. Everything looks cool. The next thing I want to do is I want to install the React version of Bootstrap. So instead of just always calling out like we're doing right here to pull in the framework, I want to use a downloaded version. So I'm not pulling it from a CDN anymore. I don't have a dependency on some other server out there. I'm going to download the Bootstrap code, which allows me to reference it directly or to actually use the Bootstrap React components. So to do that, I'm going to head back over to my console window and paste in here that I'm downloading just Bootstrap generally, so that's just the CSS and the JavaScript files. And then I also want the componentized versions of React, so I can refer to those as components within my code. Go ahead and install that using npm. Come back over here to my code. I'm going to go over to the package.json and make sure that I've got those in there. That shows up as production dependencies. I'm good to go. Now I can actually start implementing Bootstrap within there. Now I'm all ready to go to start interjecting React into here. So to make that happen, I need to install the React packages from npm. So I'm going to paste that in there. I'm bringing in just the core React library. I'm bringing in the library that knows how to interact with the DOM, the document object model. And then I'm also bringing in my router because I want to make sure I implement the React routers in here too. Now that I've got the components all set up and ready to go, I can actually start to create my top level index.html that React is expected to have. So I need to create a new file here. So not in my public directory, but right in my root code here. I'm going to create a new file and I'm going to call it index.html. And then I'll paste in the representation of what a basic React kind of index.html looks like. So here it is. Much more bare bones than what we had before. I've actually moved all that to what it actually was, which was my login.html, which is my login view of things. So my index.html now just has basically my title in it. It's got my view for meta tag to make sure that I'm responsive to different devices. I've got a warning here that will actually show up if scripting's not enabled to run. React's not going to run if you don't have JavaScript enabled within your browser. And then I've got my placeholder place where I'm going to inject all that HTML and JSX right into my document. It's going to be going off from my ID of root. And then I've got my script here, which is going to bring in my index.jsx, which is the starting place for my React application. So let's go ahead and create that one now. Come over here and create my index.jsx. And then I can just pop in a very simple representation of what that's going to look like. So I'm going to go ahead and get that element by ID. So that's going to pull in that root element as indicated by this ID right here. And then I'm going to inject a very basic app, React application component right into there. So I'm pulling this in from the source directory from something called app, and I haven't actually created that yet, so we got to make sure we go do that now. So let's go over to our source, and we're going to create a new file here, and this is going to be called app.jsx. And then I just need to create a very simple React component here. So I'm bringing in the React libraries. I'm also bringing in my CSS so that all the things I put in here will be managed with Bootstrap. And then I've got a CSS file referenced here, which is that one that I copied over before, which is our main CSS, now becomes our app CSS. And then I'm just returning a div. I'm using the Bootstrap class names here, and then I'm just displaying that. Now, one thing you'll notice that I've done that's interesting is I've actually got a class name named body. So if I go over to my app CSS, before I was actually selecting on the body element. And I don't want to do that anymore because of how React is actually set up. I don't necessarily, in my app component, have my body element as the top thing of that. So I'm going to change that over to be a class selector using the dot there instead of the element selector. And now that will match up with me putting in a body class in here. You could rename this to something else like, app or something, and maybe that would be a little more intuitive. And then I'd have to come over here and just rename this to be app. But either way works. Okay, so now I've got this thing there. I've got a component. My structure of how things work is I've got my index.html. I've got a div here. I'm loading up my JSX. When that JSX loads up, it's going to look for that root element and it's going to replace it with the app component. That app component is right over here. And I'm just going to create a div that says, hey, the app's going to display here. I'm bringing in my app CSS, which is all my main top level CSS. And that's my basic starting React application. We're actually ready to rock and roll. So I'm going to go over to my console window here, and I'm going to do npm run. And what am I going to run? If we come back over here and look at our package.json file, you'll see that I'm going to run the script of dev, and that's going to launch Vite, which is going to bundle up all my code that I have here based on the structure that I have. It's going to convert using Babel my code representation from JSX over into actual JavaScript, and then it's going to launch a little debugger window going on here, an HTTP server going on here, and host the files on here. So I don't need this live server anymore. So I'm going to shut that down, and instead I'm going to come over here and run dev. Now, if everything works right, if it's able to compile all the code, then you should get a screen that looks like this. And then I can push help if I want to see what all the things I can do. And the one thing I want to do is type O and push enter and pop open the browser. And we'll actually see what's going on. So I've got my components displaying, like your app will display here. Everything's working right. If I open up my debugger and go to my sources and display what's actually going on, you can see there's my app JSX. And right there, and we're off and running. We got our first React component, our first React application framework set up. Now, the next thing we want to do is change our application over so that we're actually seeing our navigation header and our footer and then some sort of content in the middle. So now I want to change it so that I'm not just doing this really simple application here, but I actually want something that has a header, has a footer, and also has my main body there that I can start sticking my different views into that. So if I go back over to my source code here, there's my basic app component that I've gotten, but what I really want is something like the login component here. So if I go look at this, I've got this generic header section, which I've repeated in each one of my HTML files, followed by some sort of main content, which is the information for that view, followed by some sort of footer here. So if I just grab this out of here, bring this over into my JSX file, and then I want to plaster this in. I also have to get rid of the name class because that's actually like a JavaScript keyword, so I can't use that in JSX. So when you're doing JSX, you got to change that over to actually be so that it's class name instead of class. And when Babel runs, it'll fix it all up to make them into classes, but for now we just want them to be class names. So that looks pretty good. I've got my links in here. I've got my main. I don't really want this to be main. I just want this to be something like, so I'm going to pull this out and I'm going to get rid of the login one. I'm just kind of create a generic kind of application at this point. So I'm going to replace that with app components. Go here. And then I got my footer, and that actually looks fairly reasonable. So let's go ahead and save that and see what it looks like in our browser. So I can get rid of this, and lo and behold, it looks awesome. Like, how did that happen? Well, we already did most of the work when we did our CSS. I figured out, all the Bootstrap stuff that I actually needed. I put that all in there, made it look good. I brought in all that Bootstrap stuff by, having this reference here and then just referencing the specific styles that I had. So that's what's making it look nice. And then I've got this header in here, which is just, I pulled over that HTML structure and stuck it in as my generic header. And then I added in my app components go here, and that's what's showing up in this box right here. It's getting, responsively rendered there based upon, the flex display directives that I put in there. And my footer shows up here. And I can prove that it's actually working. Like if we actually put like author's name here, it's like, Lee was here. And save that off, head back over here, and you can see that Lee is actually working here. So that's cool, like a major first step, really easy to do to actually get that up and running. Now what we want to do is we want to change it so that we can actually put our components for each one of our views in here instead of this placeholder for that. So what I want to do next is actually go create some JSX files. So in each one of my view areas here, I'm going to go create one. And let's start with the login component to be first. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to create a new file and I'm going to call it login.jsx. And in that file, I'm going to go ahead and just put in a very basic React component. So I've got React login, I've got my main going on here, and then I'm saying login is going to be displayed here. So I can go ahead and click that there, and that should be good. And then I want to create the other three ones. So I can come in and do the exact same thing I did here. So I can just copy this and come here and paste it in, and then I'm going to rename this one to be play. And then I'm going to go to scores and do the same thing here. We're going to paste it in here, and we're going to rename this to be scores. And then the last one is the about, so coming up into here and paste it into there. So I'm going to have an about component. And then I just have to fix what's actually being displayed in each of them. So the about one, I'm going to come here and I'm going to rename that to about. Make sure that's it's uppercase because it's actually the component name that you're actually displaying there. I'm going to change this one to be scores. I'm going to change this one to be play. There we go. Okay, so now I have 4 different components. They're all just displaying that they are of that component. Not really got any functionality in there yet, taking it baby steps at a time. It'd actually be a really good time right now, like if you were building your own startup, to make sure that you commit, like you've got the thing running, you've got a router going to be put in here in a minute. So you want to make sure that you save where you are so that you don't have to backtrack and redo everything all over again. So now I need to actually go and create the router that's going to route between these different components in here. So I'm going to go back to my application JSX, and in this place right here is where our components are going to actually display. So first thing I have to do is import all of the code from the packages that we downloaded earlier. And so I'm going to import my browser router with nav links and routes. I'm going to import from those directories that I just created over here, each one of those different components, my login, my play, my scores, and about components. And then I'm going to make it so that the browser router is actually controlling everything that's happening within my application. So I need to insert that standard React browser router component by putting that name right there. And then at the very end of it, I'm going to close that off with my closing tag on my browser router. Now that didn't quite work right because I forgot to close off my tag. But once I get that all set up right, then everything indents. And now this component that the React team created for me is going to check and make sure that any nav links that happen within this component are actually going to be controlled by the browser router. And then it's going to come down to this area here, and instead of just displaying this placeholder, grab my routes code and plop that in as a replacement here. So now if I get a route for slash, it's going to load my login component, play component, and so on forth. The one exception here is I've got a star router, so if none of these match, then I want you to call the not found component. That doesn't exist yet, so let's go ahead and create that. This is going to be something really simple. I'm just going to stick it at the bottom of my about page. It's the only page that's where it's being used. And this thing's just going to return a message that says, hey, I don't know what you're talking about. So that's not there. Okay, now I need to convert over my links. So right now they're still anchor links, so that means the browser is going to grab those and actually navigate away. I don't want that to happen, so I need to convert these to actually be nav links. I don't really like this link right here. That's just like when you click on the title of the application. So I'm going to actually change that to be just a simple, just textual thing. So it's not actually hot anymore. Go in there and paste that in, And now it's just a div with the, the navbar brand on there, and I'm off and running. That feels good. So I only have to change these 4 down through here. So let's go ahead and I'm going to select this here, and I'm going to do a multi-select on it, and I'm going to do a multi-select on this, so that I'm just getting those 4. I'm going to change them over from being anchor tags to being nav links. So that's bringing in the nav link component from the library. We're all cool with what's in here. Let's go to the end of the file. I'm going to get rid of them being HTML because they're not HTML anymore. I'm going to go to the actual components and change it from an href to be the to directive. That tells the nav link component that when you navigate on this thing, I want you to go there. And we can leave the class name, everything looks good there. Head back over to the front and then change the closing tag for all of them to be a nav link. And that should do it. So now I'm using the nav link components instead of anchor tags, so that will make it so that the React router will actually detect that somebody clicked on this and handle it internally rather than let the browser handling the navigation. So I've got my navigation in there, I've got my routes specified in there, and I created my not found page for the one time when if they type something in that we don't actually know about. And that should actually work. So let's go ahead and save that. Head back over to our window, and we've got something wrong. So we missed something in there. If we go over and look at our output here, we'll see that we did have some problems as we were developing here, but the page has been reloaded. So that looks like it's good. So the question is can we get any help here from the debugger? So I'm popping open my debugger, clicking on this here, and it's saying that the requested model does not export login. Okay, so I got a bug in my actual code. So let's head back over to our code, come up here to login, come over to login JSX, and oh, apparently I accidentally renamed login to play. Don't want that. So let's go ahead and rename that back. So I didn't export something called login, and I was expecting that to actually be there. So I must have missed the play one then. Let's go over to play. Yeah, sorry, I clicked on the wrong one and we renamed the wrong thing. So let's go ahead and select that one and rename this one to be play, and then we'll go ahead and say play here. Awesome. Okay, cool. Now we're doing better. Let's see if that fixes things up. Oh, awesome. No more errors. And I've actually got my login one being displayed by default. That's because my default route over here in my app JSX is to actually display the login component. So it's rendering the login component. If I click on play, then it's saying play is displayed, and scores is displayed, and about is displayed. And if I come back to home, oh, I've got a problem here. So it's actually saying index instead of home. So if we look at our routes, you can see that slash is the login component. I don't have anything for home, so it's hitting this default one here and just saying, hey, we're going off there. So what actually happened? If we navigate back up to our links, you can see that, oh, we had 2 was going to index. So if I just remove that out of there and say go to the root instead, and now we're going to get rid of that hard-coded path there. And now if I go to about and then back over to home, then I'm back on the root and I'm displaying that. Awesome. All of our routing is actually working. We're displaying a component here. All our CSS is nicely in there. We've got Vite bundling everything up. We've got Vite launching its HTTP server to make this. This is a great time if you're working on your startup to actually do a commit to make sure that you're tracking all the changes you've made so you can roll back to it if you have any problems. Because the last step that we're going to do here is we're actually going to throw in our content into each one of these components, and then we'll be done. So let's navigate back over to our code. I think I'm done with the app JSX. Let's go and look at our scores component here, and let's bring this one over first. So in order to make this happen, I need to go to the scores HTML, and I'm going to just drag this over onto the side so I can see both my scores JSX and my scores HTML at the same time. I'm going to get rid of my tab over there. I don't need to bring in my header because that's in my app component, and I don't need to bring in my footer because that's also in my app component. So all I need is just this middle section right here. So if I just grab the main code out of here and copy that over here and replace my little placeholder one with that, then I should have everything I need for actually displaying my scores view. Now the one thing I got to do is I got to fix this the keyword there once again. So I'm going to select all of these and rename them to be class name. And if I did that right, then I should be able to go over to the display again. and go to my scores page, and lo and behold, that looks awesome. Like we've actually got our scores rendered there. It looks exactly like it did when we started out. Now we just need to go and do the other components, and it should be pretty much the exact same thing. So scores is done. I'm closing that one up. I want to come over here and let's do, say, the login one next. So I'm going to open up my login HTML, drag it over here to the side and display my login. I'm going to come into my login main right here and just grab all that out of there, paste it over the top of my placeholder within my JSX component, change over this right here to actually be class name, save it, come back over to my browser, go over to my login. Awesome. Probably want to do a git commit at this point too, because now I've got that one going. Next, we're going to do our play component. So on this side over here, I'm going to open up the play component. And then over here on my left side, I'm going to open up my JSX. I'm going to grab my main out of here, pull all that out. And I'm going to overwrite that. I'm going to rename my classes to actually be class name, just like I did before. Save that off. Check to make sure that it actually looks right. So come to play. Whoop. Okay, I'm missing some stuff here. So obviously I didn't bring in the CSS that I actually needed. So we're going to go over to our play JSS file, and I have to import that CSS. So I'm going to import the play CSS, toggle back over, and now it looks awesome. Super good. Okay, so we did login, we did play, we did scores. We just have to do about. Last one, and then last thing I got to do is just push it up to our production environment. So I'm going to go to my About JSX, come over here and open up my About HTML, and I'm going to go and grab the About section from it, copy that in here, paste it over here. You're getting bored with this by now, I'm sure, but got to do this one last process. So I'm going to change this over to be class name and save that off, make sure that it actually works right. Looks right, here's our About page, and we're good. So we've totally ported our application over to use React. Just took our CSS and HTML. We created components to host that CSS and HTML and stuck it within there. We implemented the React routing and made sure we're using nav links to replace our anchor tags, and then set up our routes table so that the components would actually be rendered in there. Not too hard. You just take it slow, make sure you're doing one step at a time, verifying that it's working, committing your changes, and then moving on to the next one. So the last thing I want to do is actually make sure that this thing deploys properly. So I'm going to go over to my website, which is simon.byucs260.click, and I'm going to pull it up, and it looks great, but you can notice as I navigate, I'm actually still using HTML pages, so I'm not using React at all at this point. I want to change that so I actually do use React. So to make that happen, we got to go ahead and deploy. So I'm going to head back over here to my project. I'm going to get rid of this deploy files, because this only works if you're just doing static files up there. Now we need Vite to actually bundle things up, and then we want to deploy the bundled result of that in there. So I'm going to go ahead and delete deploy files. And instead, I want to create a new file in here, which is deploy react.sh. And then I just got to create my React script in here. Now you can pull out of the instruction what that script looks like, or you can go to the actual Simon React deliverable and pull the script directly from here. I just created my own file, made sure I named it the right thing, and I'm going to paste in that script from the instruction, which tells me how to actually call Vite to actually do the build right there. And then I'm going to create a distribution directory. I'm going to delete everything that's up on my server. I'm going to copy up everything that was in that build distribution directory, and then just clean up stuff locally. So that's all it's done, not a huge thing. The one thing that I got to make sure that I do is, because I'm on a Mac, which is POSIX compliant, I actually need to set the file permissions on this file that I just created to make sure that it actually is executable. So I'm going to go ahead and create another window over here, go back a directory, and we're going to do a listing, and I can see that I've got my deploy React thing, but it's not executable at this time. So I need to go ahead and make that executable. I'm going to just use the change mod command, set it to be +X, which is add executable, and then on that deploy React script file that I actually created there. Let's list the directory again and make sure I have that. Yep, now it's executable, I'm good to go. So now I can actually call it /deploy React, and I can tell it that I want my key to be read from this location right here. I'm going to deploy it to my production environment. Well, that's my DNS name. And then I'm going to specify that I'm deploying it over my Simon. And run it. So as that runs, I saw that it actually bundled everything up. We made our SSH connection. I copied my files up there. Those look like the bundled files that I actually built up here earlier. That looks good there. So it looks like it ran fine. I can verify that it happens by going back over here to my browser, and I'm just going to do a refresh on this page right now. Looks exactly the same, but notice my name down here, Lee was here, actually changed. That's cool. That's a good sign. And if I click on this, notice I'm not doing HTML anymore. I'm actually doing my React routing. I can also open up my debugger over here, and I can look at my source code and see what's going on. So I've got my assets coming in, and I've got my bundled JSX turned into JavaScript, and my CSS all bundled together by V. So that all looks great. So that is the last part of actually making it work. We brought everything over, we put it into a structure that V knew how to use, we created our components, we created our router, and then we set up a deployment script to actually send it out. So that's what you need to do. You need to do that same step, start with the Simon CSS one, go through the process of doing all that and deploy it to your production environment, and that checks the box for your Simon prerequisite for your startup deliverable for part 1 of React. And then you just go do that same process with your actual startup and deploy it out there, and check, you're good to go. Make sure you go modify your README file to show that you actually did all of those steps in there, and then submit it in Canvas, and you're all set. Best wishes, go get them.